Um, Next speaker is a student from University of Cologne. He also works as a consultant and has been working in New Zealand. He will talk about his research topic called information operations, and we'll hear about that now. Please welcome Mr. Sebastian Schröder.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to talk about information operations today. I will give a sector-oriented analysis of the potential impact and possible countermeasures. I'm not too sure if you all know about information operations, so I'm going to start with a short introduction. Later on I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background, the methodology, about my research results, and finally a conclusion. And as I heard before, I can talk a little bit longer, so we will see. I won't do it too long, but we will see how much questions there will be later on. So first of all, the introduction. Information operations. Information operations involves much more than computers and computer networks. It encompasses information in any form and transmitted over any medium. It covers operations against information content and operations against supporting systems, including hardware, software, and human practices. It describes activities that involve the use of powerful new tools the information age has provided to states, military forces, and even individuals to achieve strategic, operational, or tactical advantages and objectives. It raises a mixture of legal and organizational problems due to the pervasive nature of information and reliance on it, the speed of transmission of information, and the diverse fields. So you can see it's a very broad topic, and if you want to talk about information operations, the best you can do is find some definitions which fit into what you want to talk about. So I'm going to use definitions from the DoD Dictionary of Military and Associated Terms. So information operations normally is in a military context, so most of the definitions and literature you find is with a military background. But I'm going to talk about this from a research perspective, academic perspective, but you always have to refer on military literature. So you can see in the bottom of each slide there are some references. So if there are specific topics you are interested in more detail, please follow the references, because I can't really go too much in detail. So definitions. Information operations. Information operations are actions taken to affect adversary information and information systems while defending one's own information and information systems. Information warfare, which probably most of you heard already about, probably more than information operations, are information operations conducted during time of crisis or conflict to achieve or promote specific objectives over a specific adversary or adversaries. You can also define defensive and offensive information operations. Defensive information operations aim on protecting and defending information and information systems, and offensive, as the name says, aims on affecting adversary decision makers to achieve or promote specific objectives. So there are a lot of weapons you can use in information operations. Most of them are somehow related to hacking, but there are other methods. For example, in a very extreme way, energy weapons, directed energy weapons, electromagnetic pulse weapons, or destructive microbes. But honestly, this sounds a little bit like science fiction, and even though they might be available, I can't talk about those weapons. But the ones you probably all heard about already, most of you probably very much in detail, are exploitation, back-end trapdoors, social engineering, flood attacks, eavesdropping, spoofing, unauthorized access, malicious software, and indirect vulnerabilities. So information operations has some advantages over physical methods because attacks can be conducted remotely, anonymously, and without large budgets. So let's see some more definitions. You can differ class 1, personal information warfare, class 2, corporate information warfare, class 3, global information warfare. So personal information warfare are attacks against individuals' electronic privacy, including the exposure of digital records and database entries in every place information is stored. So in the majority of the cases, the victims do not know that do not know about this kind of intrusion into their privacy. But I'm going to talk about class 2 and class 3, which is corporate information warfare, warfare between corporations around the world, including disinformation, theft of data, espionage, and data destruction, and global information warfare, which is war against industry, global economical force, or entire countries or states, including sneaking in research data of competitors, theft of secrets, and turning information against its owners. Okay, we are almost through the definitions. We can define 7 forms, which is command and control warfare, intelligence-based warfare, electronic warfare, psychological warfare, hacker warfare, economic information warfare, and cyber warfare. I'm going to focus on hacker warfare and economic information warfare. But the other ones are, mostly with bigger budgets than the other ones. So like intelligence-based warfare or command and control warfare. But let's talk about hacker warfare and economic information warfare. So what is this all about? So this was a research project, InfoSec research project, which lasted 1 year. My main research questions were, what potential risks does I/O pose? What kind of I/O are the most likely ones? What measures are adequate to counter I/O threats? And finally, where are weaknesses that require improvements? So, this was the introduction. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the background. So, I don't have that much time to cover the background section in too much detail. So, please see the paper and the full version of the slides, which you can download from the conference systems for a full explanation. And you can also follow the references, as I mentioned before, at the bottom of each slide for more details. So, critical infrastructures. Critical infrastructures are those facilities, services, and information systems which are so essential that their incapacity or destruction would have a devastating impact on national security, national economy, public health and safety, and/or the effective functioning of the government. The United States commenced action on an I/O defensive posture by means of 1996 President's Commission on Critical Infrastructure Protection, where 6 at-risk sectors were identified: the defense and government, the information and communication sector, banking and finance, energy, physical distribution, and vital human services. Those sectors, every country will define different sectors which are critical to them. So here's an example of a country with 8 interconnected critical infrastructures. And you can see we have the finance and insurance sector in the middle, and a lot of interconnections to other sectors, including IT and telecommunications, services, energy, public administration, not transportation, but okay. So that's why I'm going to focus on the finance and insurance sector, because there are a lot of potential targets in the financial services sector, including payment system, investment mechanisms, and banking facilities. And just an example of the scope of banking operations, Fedwire, which is operated by the US Federal Bureau Reserve Board, processed 108 million transactions in the year 2000, with a total value excess of $379 trillion. So you can imagine if such a system was to be attacked successfully, the consequences for the financial health of several nations would be devastating.
Regarding the reference to the German BSI, is this institution also into this information operations topic? I didn't hear that. To me, this sounds more like a North American approach.
In sense of protecting against it, yes.
So they also support.
Sorry, okay, I should. Okay, the question was if this graphic is from the Federal Office of Information Security, and the question was if they are involved into information operations. So the BSI is just protecting against those things. I will talk about this a little bit later. It's about critical infrastructure protection. So you can see defensive and offensive ways, and they handle this topic from the defensive perspective. But yeah, of course, you have to know about offensive things to protect to protect your own information systems. But yes, all right, thanks. Okay, so critical infrastructures. So if you talk about information operations, you always talk about critical infrastructures. And as I said before, I'm going to focus on the financial services sector. And there are several trends in the financial services sector, which I will cover very briefly, because there's no secret with this. Everybody knows about them. But there are some aspects which are pretty important to know. So distributed and mobile computing, there's an increasing number of remote access ports on corporate networks. And mobile devices are generally vulnerable to loss and theft. So if you have mobile devices connected via remote access ports and those devices get stolen or something, you normally have an unauthorized access problem. And there's also an increasing amount of sensitive and private data on mobile devices. So this trend is pretty dangerous, even though it has a lot of advantages for cost savings and the like. Outsourcing. So organizations need to protect their information when they outsource. Therefore, the outsourcing contract is one of the key aspects and must be drafted and analyzed by specialists. So I don't want to say that outsourcing is bad, but there are some aspects you have to think about. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in a little bit more detail, but just that you heard about it already. So use of the internet. We all know that there's no built-in security and no built-in protection in the internet. And this is pretty bad for confidential and private information. And a reasonable approach would be simply not to connect or strongly quarantine exposure. But unfortunately, commercial and technical pressure are driving most organizations, also in the financial services sector, in the opposite direction. And voice over IP is the same. The same is true for voice over IP, because you have a lot of potential for cost savings and complexity reduction, but threats like call tracking and eavesdropping are pretty hard to counter. Last but not least, open source. Of course, the strongest argument is that if everybody can study the source code and experiment with the software, then bugs are